This contemporary house you see was built by Leo when he was only 25 years old. He managed to build his own 105 square meter house using second-hand shipping containers. This allowed him not only to have a beautiful modern house, but also to stick to a very tight budget of 80,000 euros. Hi Leo, thank you for welcoming us into your beautiful shipping container house. Hi Julian, welcome. Can you tell me why you wanted to build this type of
house, which is a bit unusual? Well, there are two main reasons. First is the aesthetics. Very contemporary, like an architect's house. I love it. And then, of course, there's the budget to have a house like this. With this shape, if we had gone with a traditional construction method, it would have been way too expensive.
Okay, it was really structural since you had that overhang. It was convenient to have the modules from the shipping containers.
That's it, exactly. It's the modules that already allow you to create that shape. And then, of course, structurally, there are things you have to follow to reinforce everything. But yeah, the container modules let you give that shape directly to the installation. And that's magical.
So, can you explain a bit to us
how you set up the interior? Well, so the whole lower part, that's where you'll find the living room and kitchen. There's also a bedroom with a bathroom and toilet. And then about what? 55 square meters, right? 55 square meters for the lower part, that's it. So in terms of space, we have 2 containers on the bottom and 2 containers on the top, so we have the same amount of space. Upstairs, we only have 50 square meters. We remove the stairwell opening plus the partitioning, so the upstairs is more of a sleeping area. So we'll have an office and 2 bedrooms there, including the master suite with an integrated bathroom. And here, we wanted to treat ourselves to a big room, okay? And
yeah, you really separated your day and night spaces thanks to
this height.
And then you also took advantage of the offset of the containers to make a magnificent
terrace. Well, there you go. The shape of the house allows us to have a covered terrace like this one. You should know that we spend a lot of time outside, so it was essential for us to have this outdoor living space. Knowing that the size of the house is still very reasonable, but again, this large terrace really adds something to the house.
Let's sit down so you can explain the construction process of this container house to me, shall we? Was it easy to get the building permit for an unusual house made from a shipping container? So first of all, I want
to answer yes, compared to common misconceptions. Now you should know that writing the building permit, I did that on my own, and already that's very tedious. Knowing that I was completely new to the field, I faced 2 rejections before my building permit was accepted. I had to manage with the tools I had available, which were software programs that were absolutely not specialized for making plans. But in the end, I succeeded, and today the house has been built and will soon be finished. Now here, you should know that we're in a French heritage building zone, so in a historical area. The village church is listed as a historical monument. So basically, we're in the worst possible situation. To get a building permit, since we're under the authority of the French heritage architects, who in turn have their say on the building permit. The container house, what really matters is its finished appearance. So actually, I want to say it doesn't matter whether it's a container house or a more traditional house. So if I manage to get a building permit here with all the constraints I had for my container house, it's because it's possible almost everywhere in France.
Indeed, the permit is really the first step in any construction project. Dealing with the French administration can be quite a hassle, as there are many people involved. That's why I started my container house, a service aimed at assisting people with obtaining building permits, to get it quickly and to be able to jump right into the heart of the matter, which is building the house. But you were saying that's not the only administrative problem you had. There was also getting a loan for a self-built house. That was a second challenge. That was a
real challenge. Yes, first of all, you should know that with a fully self-built house like I did, you can't go through traditional financing, meaning a regular mortgage. Today, there isn't a single bank that would want to lend to a total self-builder like I was, so I had to finance my project differently. We're operating with a reasonable budget of 80,000. I brought 30,000 euros from my personal savings, and besides that, I had to take out 2 consumer loans dedicated to the construction work at different interest rates. So 1 to 2% for 20,000 euros because I was under 26 years old at that time. And one for 30,000 euros at 3.3%. So that's it already. I was unlucky because it was the period when the rates were very high, but in total I'm borrowing 50,000 euros. When you add it all up, it still makes for a total repayment that's very reasonable since it's a small amount. Even though these are consumer loans mean they're over how many years? I have 2 loans, one over 6 years and the other for 30,000 over 10 years. So in 10 years, we can say that the house will belong to me. There you go. The
Consumer credit is a good trick, but the problem is that you can't borrow for 25 years. You are
forced to borrow
at slightly higher rates and for a shorter period
of time. Yes, but that's why it matches total self-construction. Since, in fact, in the end, the money we spend is only on materials. That's why we can build within very reasonable budgets. And I think that today, everyone is capable of building their own house, maybe starting from different levels of experience. But today, we have so many sources of information that it's possible for everyone.
Well, actually, you're going to explain to us, step by step, how you built this beautiful house. And yes, I'd be happy to. If Leo managed to self-build such an inexpensive house, it's largely because he bought a lot of things second-hand. Not only is it more environmentally friendly, but it also allows you to save a lot of money. What I said about houses also applies to cars. You can buy used parts from auto salvage yards. It might be a little bit complicated. The first step in construction was the foundations.
That's right. So the foundations. Here it was done in 3 stages. I want to say first there was the digging, then we made a first buried footing. In total, there are 12 foundation footings. And also a concrete beam that is there to support the arch of the upper floor. So these 12 footings were first dug out, then we poured the buried footings, and then in a second step we made formwork to create the stilts. So the stilts, these stilts here. They received a metal plate that was cast directly inside, so we could weld the containers on top afterwards. And these stilts are 60 centimeters high, which creates a crawl space under the house today, allowing it to be insulated from below. And that's why today you can see that the ground has been artificially raised to reach a 0 level with the house.
Okay.
And then you ordered containers and had them delivered onto your foundations? Yes, so the first 2 containers arrived. I chose to handle them by myself. It was quite complicated. A telehandler plus a forklift, I don't recommend it. If you have containers to move on flat ground with a telehandler, it can work. Otherwise, you'll need to call a crane company, which is what we did for the containers on the upper floor. A container weighs 4 tons, but it's very bulky, so the weight is manageable, but it's the size that can quickly make it dangerous.
You selected iCube containers with a ceiling height of 2.7 meters, correct?
The 40-foot iCube containers then, which are the largest containers on the market. The size of a smear mark with a slightly higher height compared to dry containers, which are the standard containers. 2 meters 40 inside. And so you took them too.
Used from the last trip because it's cheaper and you didn't need something new. What?
The container's charm also lies in imagining they've traveled the world 3 times. I
find that
awesome. You can see a bit of the dents and marks from the container's maritime life inside the house. So that's great. And there's also the economic aspect. And then here,
to hold the 2 container duos together, you had to create an arch with metal beams, right?
Yeah, exactly. So here there's an arch that's made with metal beams. The posts are H-beams, so 120 and up. We have an HEB that's now embedded in the insulation and cladding, which is 240 in section and supports the 2 containers on the upper floor. The International Organization for Standardization, corners of the upper containers rest on this HEB and they're welded to the arch, and that arch is set in place. So as I was saying earlier, it's all on a long concrete beam with rebar and footings underneath.
And on the other side, the containers are set on top of the containers below. But
You mentioned that the two containers at the bottom may not be sturdy enough to hold the two on top, and suggested adding reinforcements.
Here is a container in its maritime life. It's designed to be loaded up to 38 tons, if I remember correctly. But that's when it has its full structure. In a container house, that's not the case. So we must reinforce the containers. Above the terrace, there are already 7 meters in length. So there we had to put in cross beams, which are IPs that reinforce the
floor, since we
cut all the walls. Containers joined together to open up the space to ultimately make just one big space. And then, above the other containers, we use the exterior posts of the lower containers to support the upper containers. But in places where there are no container posts, for example here, there are support posts, load-bearing posts that go directly down in front of the foundations. So if I illustrate the upper containers, if we remove the lower containers, they still hold. Today it's not possible because everything is welded, but it's just to illustrate. We can't have this crushed shoebox effect.
The second structural part, which was a bit complicated in your project, was making a staircase opening.
It's done quite simply in the end, though complicated may not be the right word to describe it. Once you have the containers in front of you, but you have to imagine how it's built. A container. Inside the container, there's a wooden floor. We've already removed that wooden floor. It's a very thick marine plywood. It's 30 millimeters thick. To remove it, it's screwed in. Obviously, since the container is 15 years old, the screws are stripped, so it's pretty complicated to remove. And then there are metal crossbars that connect the two side rails on each side. And those metal crossbars, if I remember correctly, are spaced 28 centimeters apart. We came and cut them, and we're creating our staircase opening.
The hole is too small to impact the container's structural integrity, so you don't need to worry about any particular structural concerns.
Exactly, because the bracing of the container is provided by everything else. The bracing of the container is provided by the rest of the floor plan that still exists.
So, in the end, it's not that complicated to build a floor?
No, it's not that complicated.
Not on the stairs, anyway.
We'll see.
Later on other points, exactly. You left the container walls exposed inside. Did you also struggle for a month or more sandblasting or sanding? How did you have to do it?
Well, I couldn't do sandblasting. We sanded and we sanded. Briefly, we focused on the areas that were the most damaged. So, you have to remove the rust, and actually the goal is mainly to have a flat surface. So, where the container is scratched, you have to sand down to the metal and then go over it afterwards. Then we apply a lacquer. So in our case, it's a water-based lacquer specifically made for metal. And of course, a quality paint so that it lasts.
Water-based paint and a paint sprayer, that's it.
Yes, so it's an airless, so it's an electric sprayer, and we used it to spray so it goes really fast.
And the water-based paint doesn't actually make the container rust in certain places.
So we had to put a primer on the areas that were bare, and in this case, it was a polluting tin-based primer.
Furthermore, this paint secures pollutants to the wall, preventing their release.
It from coming off. Exactly. In fact, this paint seals the surface and therefore makes the atmosphere more livable on a daily basis.
Next, you installed the flooring and false ceiling, allowing you to run the house's technical components. Because since you don't have drywall on the walls, you had to run everything through one place. So that's pretty convenient.
And you were telling me you insulated everything!
From the outside, that's right. The goal was really to create a shell. As we know thermally, the steel container really isn't viable if you leave any parts exposed on the outside. So from underneath, I screwed in 10 centimeter thick polyurethane panels using self-drilling screws directly into the crossbeams. For the walls, I welded threaded rods onto which I placed my insulation, 160 millimeters of polyurethane as always. Then after that, we have vertical battens. The threaded rods allow you to adjust them to get a perfectly straight finished surface. Next, we have the rain barrier, which is stapled on top, After that, we have our counter battening, which is horizontal, to support the finishing layer, that is the cladding. And finally, for the roof insulation, I made completely closed-oriented strand board boxes into which we sprayed 40 centimeters of glass wool. And then on top, a rain barrier, as always, our battens and the steel tray for the finish.
So, why did you choose to put glass wool on the roof and polyurethane on the walls and floor?
For the roof, it's because I got a deal to get the insulation cheap. And for using polyurethane, it's because it's a rot-proof material. So it's the only material I trusted for exterior insulation.
Yes, because you never have a problem with moisture or water that would destroy the insulation.
It's practically immortal.
Exactly. Today, we have a rain barrier that covers all of this. But you should know that this rain barrier is only for aesthetic purposes. For our openwork cladding, to have a black background behind it, there's absolutely no waterproofing issue.
The big advantage of polyurethane, as you said, especially in self-construction, is that it's hard to make mistakes. There won't be any problem with moisture or water that will destroy your insulation. On the other hand, there are other disadvantages.
That's it. First of all, the sound insulation is poor with polyurethane. There's the phase shift, the summer comfort, of course, which is going to be reduced. Lastly, there's the pollution aspect. As a petroleum-based chemical product, it obviously poses environmental concerns.
You managed to build your container house of 105 square meters for 80,000 euros. How did you manage to stick to this budget, which is still
Quite tight. First of all, I'm lucky to be a craftsman in my professional life. I was able to get professional accounts with various suppliers, which gives me some advantages, but that's not everything. There are other alternatives, including buying second-hand materials. Both sliding glass doors here are actually measurement mistakes, which was sold to a company specializing in buying all these unsold items from wholesalers. For example, for the insulation as well, the polyurethane panels, their second choice. I had it brought directly from Spain, so it allowed me to cut the cost of the insulation in half.
The heating system.
I researched to find high-performance equipment, but the system we have now isn't a well-known brand, and yet it's exactly the same system as some of the big brands. It's just labeled differently. And then, well, the cladding, there too, we saved a lot of money. We bought our cladding in Syria, and I came and then planned it at the workshop. So we end up with cladding at 15 euros per square meter, finished, and that's really unbeatable.
So, you didn't go to the big hardware stores to buy everything you needed? You bought a lot from professional suppliers.
So for the basic construction materials, yes, that's right, mostly. But actually, by building this house, I learned to love the big do-it-yourself stores. Because there are promotional products you can find there at prices that are just unbelievable. You'll never find them cheaper anywhere else. Let me explain. Plasterboards, drywall rails, all those promotional products, it's impossible to find them cheaper than at their place.
Can you break down each part of your house's price for me a little bit?
The foundations cost us 1,500, which includes the containers, crane work, and transportation.
10,000 euros.
All the structural reinforcements, including beams, steel, and steel tubes, about 4,000 euros. Insulation, 7,000 euros. Cladding, 7,000 euros. The roofing, 4,500 euros. The terrace with its structure, 2,000 euros. The floor, which includes leveling and painting the walls. Containers, 6,500 euros. The entire heating system, 7,000 euros. Plumbing, electrical and network, 3,500 euros. And then we have 27,000 euros left, which corresponds to the interior fittings, so the bathrooms, bedrooms, partitions, and so on. So for this part, we can significantly reduce the cost. But now it depends on what kind of service you expect in your house and especially what level of comfort you want to have. And so that brings us to a total of 80,000.
I wanted us to finish this video by talking a bit more about self-building because you told me earlier that, well, at first, you planned for a year of work on your container house, but in the end, it took you 2 years. I was in the same situation. I said it would take 6 months to finish the house, but it ended up taking a year and a half to 2 years. Self-building is accessible, but it's not that simple. And I wanted you to tell us a bit about how it went for you.
And I wanted you to tell us a bit about how it went for you. For us, why did it take 2 years? Well, because sometimes, of course, there are slow periods with work, and professionally too, you have to keep up your job on the side. So I'm a craftsman, I organize my time as I want, but still I do have some constraints, and those constraints I can't get around them. And how many days a week were you working on it? So first, let's split it into 2. The first year I really worked hard on it, and in the second year I slowed down a bit. Until today, I kept my professional activity just as it was, like before the construction. I worked regular hours, and after finishing work, since I work right next to the house, I would come to the construction site after work. And then on weekends, of course, I would spend a bit more time there. I didn't allow myself to work after 9 p.m., so I could still spend time with my partner. And if I average that out over the week, it's like I was working on the house 5 hours a day, a little more on the weekend, a little less during the week.
On top of your roughly 40 hours at your job?
Yes, that's right. Yes, 40 to 50 hours on my professional work. It depends. Once again, on a few key construction points. I made the time I needed for myself. If I had to take a Tuesday off to come and receive the containers, it wasn't a problem for me since I'm a craftsman and I'm self-employed.
And if you had one last piece of advice to give, or even several to give, to people who want to start building a house with shipping containers themselves, what would it be?
First, prepare the project well. If it's a completely self-built project, for me, the only essential external party will be the structural engineering office. Especially if you have a project like mine with an upper floor. But you see, in a self-build project, what's also complicated is that there's a sense of isolation. Well, of course, we isolate ourselves from our close circle because we're fully focused on the construction site and so on. And that's definitely a piece of advice I have for future self-builders. Be very careful about that because you don't realize it. But without realizing it, it can have catastrophic consequences on our environment and especially on our morale. And I think that's why I lowered the intensity a bit in the second year. Because, you know, at some point you lose it. You're always thinking about the same thing day and night. It keeps you from sleeping and so on. Social life is essential and we need all those interactions. Today, I won't repeat my mistake. If I start another self-build in the future, which is likely, I'll handle my time differently.
And you don't regret your choice of house after all?
I don't regret it at all. And if I had to do it again, I would do the same thing.
That's a good way to end. Thanks for watching. Ask any questions in the comments. We'll review them together to address all your questions, including technical ones and anything else you think of. And see you very soon for more reports on container houses, eco-friendly homes, and other videos on the YouTube channel. Thank you for welcoming us. Bye.